Okay, so this video is going to be very brief. On Sunday, we had network problems. We're unable to capture the sermon. And so I want to just give you a very, very brief synopsis of what we talked about. So we were talking about sin, what sin is, and how sin entered into the world. And the first point that I made is that the term or the word the New Testament uses most to talk about sin has nothing to do with morality. So it's not a word like transgressions or doing something wicked or evil or debauchery or any of that kind of thing. The word is harmatia, and it is an archery term, and it literally means to miss the bullseye, to miss the mark. To understand why the New Testament uses this language, you need to always go back to Genesis, right? You always have to go back to the grand arching narrative of the Bible. And humankind was created with a purpose, with a destiny, with a plan. God intended for humankind to be his vice regents, to be his image bearers. And that means that we were to live in such a way, we were to work and play and govern ourselves in the world in such a way that the world would be able to look at us and understand what God is like. We were also supposed to be God's vice regents and steward this world, direct it towards the purposes for which God intended it to go. Early in the story, humankind make a different decision. So you might be thinking, well, if God was aiming at that, surely God would not miss what he was aiming for. And the real difference, and where the analogy gets really weird, is a human archer uses an arrow, and an arrow is an inanimate object, meaning that it goes where the archer directs it. The difference with our analogy is that humans are not inanimate objects, and we get to decide, we get to weigh in on our trajectory. And early in the human story, the human race chose a different path. We chose a different path. And that path took us and our world down a much very different storyline than would have been otherwise. So our lives were meant to reflect goodness and justice and peace and mercy and the reign of God into the world. Instead, humans become a source of chaos and evil and brokenness in this world. We introduce all of that into the world and really into ourselves. It breaks our world. It breaks us. So that was the first idea. The second idea had to do with chains, and that is that we've become enslaved to our passions. We've become enslaved to sin. It is no longer ours to command. We are now its property. It commands us. But this brings up the third idea. And the third idea is I wrestled with Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud said that we're just basically smart animals and that we're just following our instincts and our passions, and we can no more escape the bounds of those than a pig can escape the bounds of wallowing in the mud. In fact, one really thoughtful atheist said, what does it matter if I'm on drugs, if I'm sleeping around, if I'm doing all kinds of bad things, if I'm happy? It's just like a pig in the mud, right? And I said, except you weren't created to be a pig in the mud. You were created to be something far more spectacular. And what Jesus does is he comes in and he breaks the power of canceled sin. He infuses us with life, and he grafts his nature onto ours. So this is why the gospel is not self-help, and it's not about just try harder. And that is because left to our own, we will not be able to rise above all of these instincts, and these animal passions will have full control over us. It's like a piece of lead. If I hold it above the water and command it to float, it doesn't really matter, right? The second I let go of it, it sinks to the bottom. But if I were to take that same piece of lead and attach it to a nice piece of corkboard or other floating wood and place it in the water, it can now do what it was unable to do by its own nature. And that's what happens when we accept Christ. We're given the gift of the Holy Spirit. He engrafts his life onto ours, and he begins to pull us up out of the murky waters of sin and death and destruction. And it becomes possible to begin dreaming of a different future, of a different destiny. It becomes possible to begin to break free and to move forward, something that sin always prohibits us from doing. It arrests our development, keeps us from moving forward. It locks us in place. Jesus comes to break the power of cancel sin and set the prisoner free. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ.